be an issue sometimes. Okay, my apologies. I'm going to have to just try to reconnect into my slide presentation, if you'll just please give me a minute. Thank you, Shakila. I appreciate it. If you could kindly transition to the slide we were at. Thank you. Next, please. Next, thank you. Okay, so if you could kindly just return back to the previous slide, thank you. So the next one, please. Thank you. So the presidential summit that happened in November 2022 revealed that, and it's very important for us to understand this, that civil society is extremely unhappy at the pace at which the National Strategic Plan was being implemented and the government's lack of delivery on key aspects of the National Strategic Plan. And members of civil society organizations that attended were given an opportunity to express their grievances, and these were very critical of government. So if any of you had watched this live on television, you would have heard the raw anger and sort of emotions of the people who spoke and the experiences that they've been through. Now, the other thing that we learned was that the National Council on GBVF, which is tasked with implementing the National Strategic Plan, has not been set up yet. And this is another dynamic that we actually need to think about, because in 4 years since the first summit was held, it's unacceptable, given the gravity of the situation that we face with GBVF, that we do not have this National Council set up. And of course, there were all kinds of excuses that were presented. A draft bill has been circulated to Parliament to sort of look at how to set up this council, but there have been major gaps that have been picked up in the text of the bill, and these now have to be addressed, leading to further delays. And this is why people are angry and upset, because the NSP cannot be implemented until this council is set up. And then thirdly, the other thing we learned is that there was no detailed accounting presented of the disbursement of the 1.6 billion that was allocated by government to address GBVF issues. And this is very serious, because the government allocated this money, and effectively the funding model that needs to be used is a problem in terms of how the government is looking at it. So I want to then move on to practitioner perspectives on GBVF, because being a practitioner myself, this is something that is important to reflect on. Now, practitioners in the field of GBVF, they work on the ground and respond to incidences of GBVF. They are the first responders, crisis interventionists, rapid response team members, medical personnel, social workers, counselors, GBVF activists, legal experts, social justice advocates, court support officers, and so on. I mean, there's many different kinds of practitioners. And the NSP is the document that would effectively encompass this range of practitioners. And of course, the fact that it is not something that has been finalized for implementation yet is of concern. So when an incidence of GBVF occurs, the practitioners or civil society structures usually respond to an incident, regardless of the time and place, and provide the assistance and care to the individuals concerned. And what this means is that at 1 o'clock in the morning, a member of a civil society organization could get a call to say, there's been a rape or sexual assault and someone needs to come and help this person, or the police, may be contacted, and so on. Now, it's important to note that while the departments of social development, departments of justice and constitutional development, and also Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability do have services in place for survivors of GBV, these are usually constrained by budgets and also by time taken to respond to a case, to resolve a case satisfactorily. Now, there are often instances where practitioners who are part of government structures will work together with practitioners in civil society, and while there are occasional successes, there are often very many challenges. As our first presenter spoke about the Thuthuzela care centers, it's important to note that there have been successes in terms of how the Thuthuzela care center model has worked to assist survivors of GBV. Now, practitioners in the civil society sector have, in the meanwhile, as they encounter challenges on the ground, worked to try and strengthen their responses through combining their efforts in terms of services offered and the areas that they work in, that is the districts and the geographical areas, as well as the expertise and capacity and sharing of resources and budgets. But as the number of GBVF cases rise, practitioners are increasingly being challenged in terms of being able to respond to the prevalence of GBVF, whether it's in the government or civil society sector. So what can we say are the challenges? And I've just tried to summarize a few because there's so many. But effectively, what we are looking at, if we sort of condense these, is firstly, we see a decline in social values, morality, and rise in GBVF crimes. Of course, if people do not have the sort of mental state of mind, they don't have the moral capacity to decide between what is wrong and right, they're going to commit these crimes. We also have, as another challenge, a lack of political will to fast track the implementation of the NSP and other mechanisms, as I just mentioned. There's also a lack of resources and capacity to adequately respond to the scourge of GBVF in all sectors. And this is a very serious issue. There's also a lack of focus on preventative measures to reduce and eliminate GBVF. Next, please. So what does that mean in terms of how we respond to GBVF? There's been a lot of discussion. I mean, we have been talking about this for 28 plus years in our democracy. And of course, even before that, we've been trying to find the solutions. And I'm not saying that these points necessarily are, all of the solutions, but I'd like to at least reflect on something so that we have some kind of positive way forward. It's important that we invest in regenerating moral values, ethics, and social etiquette, because that is a big challenge, especially amongst the youth, through education, training, and mentorship. Young people are struggling to understand how to engage with each other. And this is why you're seeing more sort of sexual assault, rape, and GBV amongst the youth. We need to promote and sustain advocacy campaigns to hold political leadership accountable in terms of delivery. So as we see with the failure of the implementation of the National Strategic Plan and the setting up the council, this is a serious problem. And we need to ensure that we hold our political leadership accountable. I should mention that there was a report, or two-year report that was prepared. It attempted to outline what is being done. So to be fair, there have been some attempts by government to try and, put some things in place, but clearly people feel that it is not enough. So we as civil society need to study and understand the National Strategic Plan and work to implement the various pillars as efficiently as possible, because this is also our role as, advocates to ensure that we respond to GBVF. And importantly, and this is a practical thing we can do, is to invest in sustainable preventative measures to curb GBVF, such as an appropriate school curriculum, where young people are taught about gender issues. We often teach gender studies at university level, but it's something that needs to be done high school. We need to have extracurricular and after-school programs for youth and adults. And this is something that we really need to be looking at implementing so that the next generation, in fact, the current generation of young people that are going through school will benefit through these programs, and hopefully we can ensure that we see fewer rates of sexual violence and assault, and in fact, if we can manage to eliminate it altogether. So let me leave it at that point, and I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lubna. Spot on timing. I'm sure you heard the clock in the background, and really a very informative input for all of us really to learn about the backdrop to our national strategic plan. I'm sure we all remember young women taking to the streets and calling for a shutdown and demanding to meet our president. What wonderful activism there, leading to the presidential summit, the crafting of the national strategic plan. And I know we've had some fine minds involved in that steering committee and its processes to draft the national strategic plan. So thank you so much for pinpointing for us, where those persistent problematic areas are, which seems to come down to the lack of political will, the lack of adequate resources, inadequate prevention measures, but all in the face of a rising tide of gender-based violence. I'm going to move us to our final panelists, but Lubna, can I ask that you, in the meantime, apply your mind? There are two key questions on the Q&A that I think are pertinent to you, and they relate to implementation of the National Action Plan and to prevention measures. A concern about what do we do when MECs can't be held accountable. Helen's raised this point about an MEC who belittled a survivor of gang rape. What action can be taken against, for instance, leaders who fail to act accordingly? And equally, a question pertaining to the rising levels of violence in our country, and gender-based violence and femicide are only one aspect of violence generally that we seem to be in the grip of. And what is an indication when we see Becky Pele's statistics there? What can be done around preventing violence in and of itself? So if you wouldn't mind chewing over those and coming onto the Q&A and lending your views there. We now then move to our final presenter. And again, we welcome a colleague from the wonderful National Prosecution Authority. We have Stephanie Erasmus. And Stephanie is the senior prosecutor. Wonderful to know. She's responsible for maintenance and child support matters in KwaZulu-Natal. And she falls within this wonderful unit, the Sexual Offences and Community Affairs Unit of the National Prosecuting Authority. Equally, you'll see some questions have come through. Setenjwa on the chat has asked about what work has been done to prepare and strengthen our court preparation services. And we're pleased to see that Stephanie is involved in training of officials for the Department of Justice. So obviously measures are in place to gear our court officials to adequately implement the legislative framework and respond appropriately, but we're obviously still hugely concerned about how that's panning out. So Stephanie, can we invite you then to give your input to us? We welcome you and look forward to that. You've got 15 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Program Director. I appreciate that. I would like to start off by apologizing for my video feed and my venue. I'm sitting in my car because I've been working in the field the past couple of days. But to head right on with it, I would like to talk this afternoon about the relationship, if I can almost call it, between gender-based violence and the claiming or the payment of maintenance in South Africa. It is a worry for me that it seems to me that sometimes there's a lack of understanding that the non-payment of maintenance falls right into that gender-based violence, or much of it that we are talking about. And it's very important that people understand how all of this works together. I will start off by referring to the Domestic Violence Act of 116 of 1998, or 89 rather. First and foremost, to refer to the definitions of a domestic relationship. That's just to show how that works into the relationships that where there's a legal duty to maintain people people and that not being complied with. If we look at the Domestic Violence Act, we will see that a domestic relationship is defined as a relationship between a complainant and a respondent in one of the following ways, which is they are or were married to each other. And then it also refers in subsection D, or the D subpart D, that they are family members related by consanguinity, affinity, or adoption. So we need to keep that in mind, because I'm going to refer to the Maintenance Act and how that refers also to the relationship where maintenance is payable. Domestic violence is defined in the Domestic Violence Act. There are various definitions, obviously, but I would like to highlight the D part as economic abuse also being domestic violence. And then that economic abuse is defined as the unreasonable deprivation of economic or financial resources to which a complainant is entitled under law, or which the complainant requires out of necessity, including household necessities for the complainant, mortgage bond repayments, or payments of rent in respect of the shared residence. And then we will see in a minute or so, when I refer to what a magistrate can grant in terms of a domestic violence interdict, that the magistrate can grant emergency monetary relief for an applicant in a domestic violence interdict. And that emergency monetary relief is defined in the Domestic Violence Act as compensation for the monetary losses suffered by a complainant at the time of the issue of a protection order as a result of the domestic violence, including loss of earnings, medical and dental expenses, relocation and accommodation. And this is what I'm referring to, and household necessities. So, as I have said, that once an applicant applies for a domestic violence interdict in terms of Section 4, that the magistrate can then go on and in terms of Section 7 of the Act, make a protection order to prohibit a respondent from committing any act of domestic violence, which includes the act of economic abuse. And for example, that the magistrate can prohibit a respondent from entering a residence shared by the complainant and the respondent. And then in subsection 4, that the court may order the respondent to pay emergency monetary relief, having regard to the financial needs and resources of the complainant and the respondent, and such order has the effect of a civil judgment of a magistrate court. So that's what the Domestic Violence Act provides for. Maintenance Act, first and foremost, in subsection 2, and that is also a misconception, unfortunately rife in the society, is that because the Maintenance Act talks about children all the time, that people find it necessary to require that you prove that the Maintenance Act shares or applies to, for example, spouses of specific marriages, which can be a marriage under Hindu or Muslim rights, or under a customary marriage or a civil marriage, same-sex marriages, all of those. So the Maintenance Act in subsection 2 provide that the provisions of this Act shall apply in respect of the legal duty of any person to maintain any other person, irrespective of the nature of the relationships between those people giving rise to that duty. So as I have said, consequently, Maintenance Act applies also to the legal duty that exists in marriages and also to the legal duty that exists between brothers and sisters to maintain each other. The Maintenance Act then in section 15 provides for maintenance, and it defines maintenance as follows. Section 15.2 then defines maintenance as what is reasonably required for proper living and upbringing, and includes provision for food, clothing, accommodation, medical care, and education. So there we are back where we latched onto the Domestic Violence Act that provides for a magistrate to make an order for those very things for emergency monetary relief. Now to go back to the order that will then be made by a magistrate in a domestic violence interdict. In terms of the Maintenance Act, that can be enforced. In other words, if not having been satisfied, that in terms of section 26 of the Maintenance Act, an applicant can apply for enforcement is provided for in the definitions of Maintenance Act, section 1, where a maintenance order is defined as an order for the payment, including periodical payment of sums of money towards maintenance of any person issued by any court in the Republic. So not only a court order issued by a maintenance court, but also a court order issued by a divorce court or a court or domestic violence court will be able, the maintenance court will be able to enforce. Now, the gender-based violence then came about. So in practice, court order is made in the divorce court for maintenance to be paid to, for example, the spouse. And then slowly but steadily, the respondent starts defaulting. And the applicant she's forced to get on with less and less and less, to such an extent that you will get sometimes to where a respondent will approach children's courts to say, my ex is not looking after the children appropriately. Why is the mother not looking after the children appropriately? She hasn't got the money. Why doesn't she have the money? The respondent is not keeping to his maintenance order. And then to top it all, the respondent will approach the maintenance court to say, I want a reduction in maintenance. And many a time, unfortunately, these matters will be dealt with incorrectly by the courts. Maintenance Act. It provides for application to be made, whereafter application shall be investigated. And part of what needs to be investigated in the application is whether there's good cause being shown by the person making application. In other words, what is his reasons for applying for the court order to be substituted or discharged? Now, a good cause cannot be, I no longer want to pay, or I don't feel you entitled to the money. It must be something to do with diminished income, which the court officials should require proof of since date of previous order made. Now, that's not happening all the time. And unfortunately, some matters are being enrolled without investigating, because once investigated, the maintenance officer can actually make a call to enroll or not enroll such a matter. And based on the evidence provided or the good cause provided for by the respondent, the official should actually decline to enroll those matters. Now, just lastly, what then respondents does is that, as I've said, slowly but steadily, they pay less and less, up to where an applicant is so destitute and she cannot apply and she cannot get to where she can actually enforce the order. So, and that is how the domestic violence and the maintenance is actually tied, and how maintenance becomes gender-based violence. So that was what I would like to have highlighted today. I think I've used a little bit less than my 15 minutes, but Madam Program Director, I think I'll leave the audience with that.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you so much for being so committed, messaging and engaging with us from the field as you are. Please just, if you are able to remain available to participate in the discussions that are unfolding. So colleagues, I hope you have been diving into the Q&A chat where we're seeing some questions being answered live by our colleagues, and I'm going to take some new questions, but I think just for the benefit of those who've not seen those answered questions, and if you click on the Q&A, you can click over and have a look at how those questions have been answered so that you can see that information. But before we go there, Dr. Segi Naidu, there were two questions that one is mine, so I haven't been able to post it. I see that Omashni's answered, but there's a particular aspect that I think is important. So two of us, Sitenjwa has raised the concern about delays in DNA samples coming back from our forensic labs. And I had also wanted to ask this of you, that we typically hear about this critical backlog in the processing of forensic evidence, in obtaining vital DNA evidence that is needed for prosecution in sexual offenses and other criminal cases. And it obviously has a dire impact on the prosecution. Sitenjwa said in some cases, perpetrators walk free. She's raised concerns about whether a specimen may become invalid or not. Can you speak to us about this backlog? What has caused this backlog? You provided us with wonderful information about all these different forensic evidence collection kits. Are these evidence collection kits available across the country? First of all, that was going to be my question. Are all our, whether it's state hospitals or Tutuzela care centers or clinics, are they equipped with the necessary kits to collect the kind of evidence that you spoke to? So that's the first question. Are we equipped across the country to be gathering this kind of forensic evidence that is so necessary for the prosecution of these cases? And the second question that flows from that, Dr. Naidu, is what do we do? What is causing the backlogs? You know the impact that this has on the prosecution cases. What can be done about it? Could you speak to us about those interlinked issues, please?
Thank you very much, Janine, for that. These are very thorny, sensitive, difficult issues that we have been facing with for some years now. So there's two questions you ask. The first part is the availability of the kits. And as I've indicated in my presentation, that the kits are procured by the South African Police Services, and they are also analyzed by the South African Police Services. We as healthcare workers are the intermediaries in the system, and we collect the evidence and hand the kits back to the police officers and the investigating officers. So in answering the question about the availability of the kits, it's an erratic supply of the kits. We would have for a few years, we would have the availability of all kits, and then suddenly there'll be a shortage of adult kits or shortage of pediatric kits. And then we have to make do with using an adult kit in a child or a pediatric kit in an adult. That's not a train smash, but I think the important thing is that we must have a kit that we can use. So occasionally we do run out of kits. That's the one issue. In terms of the backlog, I think the SAPS officials might be the best placed to answer this. And I'm sure Omashni is burning to respond as well, because she's been in the forefront to try and get a laboratory in KZN, a DNA laboratory specifically for gender-based violence. Of course, this is going to be a long-term project, but I think we need to start somewhere, and we need to start small. because what's happening at the moment is that we collect evidence and it's taken to a lab in Amanzimtoti, which is part of the police laboratory. It's a screening laboratory where they screen the evidence, and then they, if they do find any DNA there, it's repackaged and sent to either Cape Town or Pretoria. But if no evidence is found, then they would issue an affidavit to that effect that, that there's no DNA in that. I'm sure Omashni would like to answer further regarding this.
Okay. Thank you, Omashni. Can I invite you to come in and just carry on and lend your view in that regard? But then I wonder if, and I note that Lubna is busy answering some of the other questions that are there. Won't you carry on and speak to that point? And then if you wouldn't mind, Omashni, won't you just high level talk to the other issues that have come through on the Q&A and your response to those? I think that your responses are important to feed into our discussion. So if you could just, first of all, just come in on that, on the backlog.
Thank you, Janine. So just in terms of the backlog, I think, and I'll say it very loosely, Dr. Naidu and I are so-called partners in crime when it comes to the issues around DNA. I think this is one of those fights that we need to fight for a long time to come. But in saying that, we know that the large majority of our cases that come to our courts are dealing with children. And we also know the issues around competency, that many children are not competent to actually proceed in terms of testifying around the issues of, like I say, competency because of the age factor. And we're going to rely very highly in terms of DNA evidence. Now, again, like Dr. Naidu has said, KZN does not have a DNA lab. So we rely on Cape Town as well as Pretoria for that process. We are in the process of mooting for a DNA lab in KZN, and that will happen in time. But also in saying that, Janine, what does this actually mean? Does it mean cases get withdrawn because there's no DNA? No, it doesn't. Yes, if we're relying solely on DNA, then we are going to have to withdraw. But does it mean that those matters just go on the side? And the answer is no. It goes into a pending system where prosecutors would actually now pen the matter, wherein pending means it goes into a system where the prosecutor will request DNA again another week or rather 2 weeks until such time that the matter does eventually we get a response. Now, I need us to also understand between Forensic Science Laboratory on a national level and the National Prosecuting Authority on a national level, there is a DNA priority project that is in place. What this has meant, and I'll indicate to the attendees here, that on the last, every month, we receive DNA reports. The month gone by, we received 816 reports. That's a lot of reports to receive, which actually means that the prioritization of DNA is increasing. But again, due to the number of cases we see holistically in the country, it is imperative that we have our own DNA lab in KZN. We see the issues around vulnerable groups. You see the issues around older persons. And where we have DNA evidence, even if the survivor testifies in, like example, an older person, DNA evidence is vital. So that is where we are, Janine, in terms of the DNA evidence. And fingers crossed with public-private partnerships, as noted in the NSP and our reliance in terms of public-private partnership as well. Hopefully there's light at the end of that road. Thank you, Janine.
Okay, thanks so much, Nii. Can I ask you, I'm going to go to Lubna now. Lubna, if you can come in on the two kind of key questions around prevention and implementation. But Omashni, I think what would be great if you wouldn't mind just pulling out key points that you'd like to stress from those questions that you've answered already on the chat. Just that you think anything that you think there is important to bring to the attention of people who may not be on the chat. Lubna, there was two particular questions. One, this very specific incident of what action can be taken against, for instance, an MEC who belittled a gang rape survivor. So there were concerns around implementation when the policy is not being implemented by the very people tasked, or it's being undermined by the very people tasked with implementing it. So if you have a response on that. But secondly, this broader question of noting that we are a violent society. Violence in our society is increasing. Gender-based violence and femicide is one aspect of violence in our society. We're never going to be able to eradicate GBV in a context of burgeoning violence itself. Just your thoughts and your views on that as a practitioner as well, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Janine. Yes, I have attempted to answer it with the typed responses, but in terms of the issue of the MEC, MECs are public officials and they should be held accountable for their actions. And even if this incident happened behind the stage and maybe not directly in front of a public audience, the perpetrator, the person who spoke in an inappropriate way to the survivor of the gang rape must be held accountable. So as I said in my typed response, that the person must be reported, the MEC, to her line manager, or the survivor herself can, open up a case of harassment or verbal abuse at a police station. If there were witnesses to the actual incident, they must fill in they must do an affidavit to say what they witnessed, because such people should not be allowed to get away with their actions. And it's very often the case that we see an act of violence happen in front of us and we walk away from it, or we don't step in to try and stop it or intervene. And this is one of the problems. And so to answer the question of violence generally in our country, violence that we see happening, criminal violence, and so on, that may not necessarily be GBV related, is a legacy of apartheid history. And there's a lot of unresolved trauma that people are still going through. We have huge levels of poverty, inequality, unemployment, and so on. And these all contribute towards the sort of perpetrating of GBV crimes, because a man, for example, and that doesn't excuse his behavior, but a man, for example, who is unemployed and feels, that he has no role or purpose in life, will possibly take out his frustrations on, the woman around him, his wife, his daughter, any other female person. So, men very often feel that physical violence is a way to deal with their frustrations. And it's very unfortunate. But the one, thing that I see positive is that a lot of men's groups and boys groups have emerged that are trying to deal with men's and boys' issues. There are many sort of, child-headed households or fatherless households where there's no father figure who's a role model to young boys, and those boys grow up seeing violence and they think it's okay. So there are ways in which we can address this, but we have to understand that the legacy of violence that emerging apartheid is still there with us. We need a national process to deal with that trauma. So there are multiple things that have to be done. But I do believe that there are initiatives, and I applaud the men's and boys sort of groups that have emerged trying to do this work. But we all need to work together in this regard. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Lubna. And while you answer, and exactly on that point, Sanele Zuma has posted a Q&A on our Q&A stream, speaking about the amazing work that's being done here at UKZN. Sanele is the chair of UKZN Men of Virtue, doing amazing work around education, mentoring, activism, and awareness, working with young boys and men to address some of the root causes of gender-based violence. And if you see there the detail of the work that they've been doing, and his concern and his complaint is that this work is not supported. Sanele, what I'm busy typing in response, I have no power to disperse resources, but what I'm going to do is to ask you to email me. I'm the chair of the Gender-Based Violence Committee. We're not an implementation agency, but what I can do is refer your request to key stakeholders within the university and request that they respond to you. So I'm responding and giving you my email address. Please would you contact me and let me see if I can connect you with departments within the university who can assist. There's a new question. Oh, that's Shakila making a comment on the webinar chat. Can I go back then to Amashni? No fresh questions have come through, and you worked very hard during the webinar to answer many of those questions. Can I invite you to pull through any critical issues that you think should be brought to the attention of our participants in our webinar today? There were huge concerns around court preparation, some technical questions that I see that you've addressed, questions around training of prosecutors. Is there anything specifically that you would like to highlight from the slate of questions you've answered?
Sure. Thank you, Janine, for that as well. All of the questions are remarkably important, and I think I'm going to touch them as we go along. So when we're looking at number one, training is imperative. But I want to latch on quickly to the previous question, especially in institutions of higher learning. And I'm going to reach out to your unit, Janine. We've done training with institutions of higher learning. We make ourselves available as a team of a multidisciplinary team to provide ongoing training within the institutions of higher learning and to create awareness. So you've got Dr. Naidu, you've got myself, you've got Stefani, you've got issues around human trafficking. So all the ambits of gender-based violence and femicide, we are ever so willing to come on board and train and create that awareness. But be that as it may, when we're looking at stakeholders such as police, such as your medical officers, such as your prosecutors, such as social workers, we have multidisciplinary training sessions on an ongoing basis. You might not have everybody sitting together at any given time, but where the need arises, we do sit together and we have multidisciplinary training sessions. That's important. And the reason I say it's important is because as a team that sits together, you hear those challenges that each stakeholder experiences in their own field, but has a reliance on another stakeholder. So those training sessions are imperative and does happen. But you also have training sessions, particularly for prosecutors, because the need is different, or particularly for police officials, because the need might be different. It might be statement taking. The need might be different for medical officials. And again, it might be a combination of the legal aspects with the medical side. So each training session might be tailor-made. So that's important. What's also important is when we're looking at the issues, and that talks about specific training in terms of mentally disabled or intellectually disabled persons, and how do we deal with those witnesses. Important, and I think this is something that we must always remember, is training on social context, and that speaks around the issues of the MEC question. Social context plays a vital role, and we cannot underestimate the importance of social context training. It's also it's also legislated in terms of our Sexual Offences and Related Matters Act. Why is social context training important? Because everybody looks at things differently, from our upbringing to our own value system, etc. But when a survivor appears in front of you, you need to ensure that the survivor is the person that you are focused on. Circumstances are different. People react differently. But understand the survivor in front of you is absolutely important. There's no need for judgment. You cannot go around saying, Because you wore a short skirt, therefore you raped. Because you went to a tavern, therefore you raped. No, nobody gave you the right to do that. So that's the sort of training that we go on to start off with. Also important is, again, creating the knowledge. The part of the protective measures that we have in place is our court preparation officers. You imagine yourself going into an environment, and if you had to ask yourself, how many of you have actually testified in court? It's not a nice experience. People say, listen, so I was now in a position where I felt I was the perpetrator. So it wasn't a nice experience at all. Your court preparation officer takes you through that process. In terms of, if I'm testifying in a court itself, this is where I'll stand. This is where the magistrate or judge will be sitting. This is where the defense counsel. So what you're basically doing is you're breaking down resistance in terms of the fear of the unknown. Also understand that I might take medication at 12 o'clock. So come that time, 12 o'clock, my energy levels go down, or my sugar level goes down, or I'm just hungry right now, or I'm a child and I need to nap at 12 o'clock. So I play with my hair, or I'm just disruptive, or I don't concentrate. The court preparation officer knows this information. And this is the information that the court preparation officer will tell me as a prosecutor. So I will inform the court. So the court understands that these are the circumstances of this particular witness. That is important. Also, what's important is, and this for me plays a vital role, victim impact statements, victim impact reports. So the survivor might say, I can no longer sleep with my lights put off. Why? Because every time dad walked in, before he raped me, whether it was day or whether it was night, he'd put the lights off. I can't get over that. And he'd draw the curtain. I can't get over that. Or better yet, I cannot be in a room alone. Those factors will be in a victim impact statement. If the trauma is so severe that I cannot leave home without being accompanied by somebody, that a victim impact report would talk about. And all of this is important for sentencing purposes so that the court is aware of this. I think we've addressed many of the issues. We spoke about medical legal evidence. Yes. Sorry, Janine.
Just Wait, do you want to finish?
Yes.
That point? Yeah.
Yes, please. Just on the issues of medical legal evidence. You know, you also have issues or cases of child pornography, and the defense counsel will say, but I need, like with the J88 now, because that's quite confidential information in that report, and it cannot get into wrong hands because, like we say, like Dr. Naidu explained the content of the J88. But in saying that, when it comes to issues also of child pornography, and the defense counsel say, I need to access those photos to prepare my defense, you need to make application to look at those photos. You will not get those photos in your hand. That would never happen. You might have access in terms of viewing those photos with the investigating officer being present, but you'll never have physical access to those photos, nor will you be able to take pictures of those photos whilst being in the company of the investigating officer. These are protective measures that we have in place, Janine, to protect our child victims, to protect our victims, our survivors of gender-based violence. Thank you, Janine.
Thank you so much for that and for your heartfelt input there. Sanele, there's a great response and offer of assistance from Lubna, Dr. Nadvi online as well. Just for those in our UKZN community who are part of our discussion, Lubna has correctly identified that there's a need. There are many interventions and initiatives taking place within the UKZN space. I see Eleanor Langley is one of our participants, one of the huge amazing work that is being done and championed by Eleanor, work through peer educators taking place in residences as well. But our challenge has been that all these measures are happening in different spaces and we're not connected and collected adequately so that they can be rolled out, across all our different spaces. Just to let colleagues know that we have put recommendations forward before our Vice Chancellor. Those of you who are part of our community will have seen the GBV strategy and program of action deliberations taking place. We've put forward recommendation for a central GBV unit with satellite units on each of our campuses, staffed, resourced, and incorporated and taken forward as part of the project renewal process, which has the support of the Vice Chancellor. So we're hoping to see our recommendation come about so that we have better coordination and more even resourcing of some of the amazing work that is being done. We've got a few minutes remaining, probably about 10 minutes before we need to wrap up. I'm wanting to bring us to some of the recommendations, the fine recommendations Lubna's put forward around what interventions are needed and where these might take place. We've also heard very particularly from our speakers, for instance, Dr. Segi Naidu has said, we need a DNA lab in KwaZulu-Natal. So that, there are very specific recommendations and interventions that have been put forward. Before I go to a conversation really to draw these strands together around recommendations, are there, because we love hybrid now, right? We're so good at doing this. Is there anyone present in the discussion who's burning with a question, who's not had the opportunity to put it on the Q&A or on the webinar chat, and who would actually like to do the old-fashioned thing and put your hand up and ask a question or make a comment? As filming the external attendees, would anyone like to unmute yourself and make an observation or put a direct question? If there's a burning thought passing through your mind and you just need to bring this into the conversation, you think it's a critical issue that we've missed, you think that there's a silence on this issue, or we've got something terribly wrong, here's an opportunity. Would anyone like to put your hand up? And unmute yourself and join us. You can chew over that. It's not a once-in-a-lifetime offer. I'm going to keep an eye on that screen. I've got 3 or 4 in front of me at the moment. So if you would like to participate directly, ask a question, raise the point, say the thing that you think no one is saying or that hasn't been said yet, we would really love to hear your voice and hear your view. Great, and we've managed to address all our Q&A questions. So on the recommendations, and I'm hearing 3 kind of core realms of intervention that are needed, and obviously our starting point is always prevention. I think the penny dropped with us in the HIV and AIDS sector. We realized we would never have enough resources available to assist people who are HIV positive. We'd never be able to reach enough people. We need to actually prevent people from becoming HIV positive in the first place, and a whole lot of intervention and resources within geared towards messaging and awareness and prevention around HIV. Likewise, I would suggest with gender-based violence, we simply don't have enough NGOs or shelters. We do not have enough sexual offences courts and Tutuzela care centres to deal with and mop up the victims and the survivors of gender-based violence. The demand and the need and the levels of gender-based violence are rising. Clearly, equally, we need to draw on our insights from the HIV sector and do far more work in the prevention and awareness segments. Can we just pause there a bit? Lubna's already made recommendations around interventions needed with young people, around moral and ethical and social values and behaviors, to denorm the violence in our society so that gender-based violence doesn't just become another acceptable form of violence. So recommendations have been made around including that in the curriculum at the school level. I know that we are proposing equally a curriculum intervention at UKZN in the same breath. We have training. The second measure that has been proposed is training and interventions to improve response of our officials and activism from civil society in reporting and informing. But can we just pause on that prevention and awareness Would anyone like to make additional recommendations? What are we missing? What game are we missing? We've been running our 16 days webinars. We see a heightened awareness within the media. What trick are we missing? We're working with men. We've got young men working with men. We've got Men of Virtue network at UKZN. What is missing in our slate of prevention and awareness response in terms of resetting those values and those norms within our society? Particularly, Lubna, your hand's up, so I'll invite you to come on board here, particularly when we must recognize that we have not addressed those structural impacts of apartheid and the violence that was enacted on generations of people that is obviously residual in our society. So
hi, Janine, can I come in?
yes, please do.
Okay, so I mean, there are many things that one can look at in terms of, the prevention aspect. But the one thing I've been saying is absolutely essential. And this, refers to the sort of pre-incident response versus post-incident. In other words, we are expending a lot of energy trying to respond to GBV issues after the incidences happen, rape, sexual assault, and so on. And, I think that, of course, that is absolutely essential. It's important because that is a support mechanism for the survivors. But imagine a world where if we attempted to invest a lot more into prevention so that actually you don't have the rapes happen, you don't have the sexual assault happen. And I think that one of the things we need to do is to have a 365 days approach, because when it comes to awareness campaigns, whether it's GBV, whether it's any other issue, we devote a section of, the year to it, a day, 16 days, a week, whatever, a month. But really, the GBVF issue requires us to be involved 365 days. And what I mean by this is that we need to have, I proposed some time ago, and I don't know if, our sort of UKZN colleagues are listening. I proposed that we have a calendar which we create, which basically, has sort of 365 days on it. And each day, we ask people who get the calendar or, purchase it or whatever, to write down what it is that they're going to do that day to make sure that GBV and femicide doesn't happen. And I think that that's a practical way of getting people involved. We're spending so much of money on, bringing people together and so on. If we can have a campaign where we launch a 365 days program, and you have a calendar that assists, and everyone actually, commits every day to doing something, and the calendar itself can have something written on it to say, okay, today do this, do that, or whatever, inviting people to do things, giving suggestions. I think that that is something that we can really make happen. We've been trying to, as an NGO, the advice desk, to get this going, but it requires resources and funding and so on. So I'm proposing a very practical thing, a 365 days campaign. The government has said it's committed to it 365 days, but on the 11th of December, after the 16 days is over, what's going to happen? We're going to go back to our sort of other ways of being, and possibly focusing now on, it's the festive season, and the festive season is also another time in the year when there's increased cases of GBV, because people are coming together, in their families, in their homes, and there's increased alcohol consumption, there's all kinds of things happening, and that's when we see an increase in the cases of GBV. So a practical suggestion, 365 days campaign, however you want to do it. You have a calendar, you have activities, you have programs. Let's make it happen. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lubna. Can I resort and revert to our other panelists in our closing minutes of 16 days and of this webinar? If there's anything, if you'd like to take a minute just to give any final observations or recommendations, and I'll go in order of presentation. So thanks, we've heard from Lubna. Omashni, would you like to make any closing remarks or recommendations briefly? Segi, you've unmuted yourself, go ahead.
Thank you, Janine.
I want to comment on the low conviction rate that you spoke about earlier. And I think, and to tie this up with, the training and all the stakeholders that are involved in gender-based violence need to be competent. How often have we heard that the police have bungled up with a particular case and the perpetrator gets off on a technicality? So I think it's important that whether you're a police officer, a doctor plays a very important role. If you're examining a patient and collecting forensic evidence, the documentation has to be precise, accurate, objective, and can withstand cross-examination in a court of law. And similarly with the prosecutors, that they need to be trained in prosecuting these cases as well. So everybody, and the social workers, of course, to come in on board to provide that psychosocial care for our victims. So training is key, and we all need to be competent if we are going to address this issue.
Wonderful, thank you. So far in the bag, we have everyone must play their part, commit to 365 days of activism. He's reminded us of the importance of training so that we have competent, functional systems that work and that deliver. Omashni, what would you like to add to the bag?
Thank you, Janine. Indeed, training is an absolute necessity, capacity building, and we can never have enough of that. Laws change continuously, but also people move on. A district court prosecutor will become a regional court prosecutor, and a regional court prosecutor will become a high court advocate. And we move through the systems, not only as prosecutors, but also as other stakeholders. What's also important is that we take this awareness to the people. Who are our people? Is our community. To our older persons that know that they have a right not to be abused, that they have basic human rights, that they have a right to shelter, and they have a right to food and right to water and basic human rights. And that is a necessity, and that they must not, should not be abused. So creating awareness is essential, but also us working as a team. We cannot forego the fact that this is a fight that we cannot fight alone. And like Dr. Naidu said, we've been fighting for a lab, and we'll continue to fight for a DNA lab in this province until we get one. But again, let's tackle each of the cases as we come along. I like the question around, or the recommendation around us empowering our men and our boys. That's important. Let's also talk traditional leadership. That's a conversation we're already having right now in the Mkanyakude district, in the King Shletshwayo district. Let's continue to have ongoing conversations with our traditional leadership around gender-based violence and femicide. So there's a lot of work to be done. But again, like I said, this is something that we cannot do alone, and we can only eradicate. And I like what you said initially, Janine. It's eradicating gender-based violence. It's not, can we deal with it? It's eradicating it. We can do it, but only together. Thank you.
And not just about making women more resilient to it. Something about that makes me bristle. Omashni, I see that you are responding to the request from Tembi Noble, inviting you to render training to social workers at Durban and Coast Mental Health. Please try and get your answer in. I know we've got load shedding at Thorn. We're going to lose some people. Stephanie, are you still there, parked in your car under the thorn tree? Would you like to pop up and give us
she's left,
closing comments?
She had to
She's
leave.
left. Okay. All right, her dedication and commitment are noted and appreciated. Colleagues, we then have 2 minutes for me to just very briefly say thank you. Thank you, first of all, to our participants. What a horrible time of year to try and get anything of substance done. Thank you so much for being here in the room with us, raising such critical issues and engaging with our speakers. Thank you so much. And of course, our panelists, what fantastic inputs, so informed, people who are expert and really at the coalface, and yet so humble and passionate and committed and engaged. Really, we commend and celebrate your work, and thank you for joining us today. Finally, our wonderful corporate relations division, my favorite department at UKZN, and Shakila, especially Shakila Takur-Prasad, for conceptualizing, organizing, chasing us all to confirm and sign up and engage and formulate finally a program. Thank you so much for making this happen and for ensuring that our university has a conversation like this in this important 16 days. So on that note, thank you everybody. Go forth and start your calendar on the 11th of December, and let's see what the next 365 days, what transformation we can bring about in our own spaces, in our own communities. Thank you so much for the flowing hearts on the screen, and your energy and commitment and discussion today. There's Shakila's thanking you as well on behalf of the corporate relations team. Great, 4 o'clock on the nose, over and out. Thanks everybody, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.